It's why we're here in the first place, right?
Wait, this gets so much worse. Listen to this
Oh
next line,
God.
okay? So I too might have tried to transition. The allure of escaping womanhood would have been
Oh,
huge.
oh my God.
Everybody, this is the wise and wonderful Liv posting. I'm pretty sure none of you aren't aware of her amazing charm and grace, but Liv, do you want to give a quick sales pitch or something just
Oh
to
shit.
introduce to the 5 people, the 5% of people who might
Oh
not
yeah.
be crossovers?
I am Liv posting, not lib posting, by the way. At no point am I to be referred to as lib posting. Yeah, leftist streamer, Canadian, trans, she, her, communist. I do news stuff as well as memes and video games. And I post unspeakable things on Twitter. That's
And
pretty much,
unspeakable is a good way to put it. Speaking of
yeah.
unspeakable, I have to ask, what were your initial thoughts a couple days ago when, in the midst of everything that's going on in the world, the protests, the revolution, the Black Lives Matter movement, you saw that JK Rowling decided now was the time to really, really solidify her turfiness?
Yeah, that was awesome. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think like particularly on trans Twitter, it's been known for a long time that she's been like a closet TERF,
Mm-hmm.
where she'll like a post about how like trans women are like there's one about like trans women being foxes in a hen house, in like women's jails and stuff, which was
Yes.
like a while ago. So she'll say like, and she's also like a rich white lady from Britain,
Mm-hmm.
and I think 95% of those people are transphobic. I don't know what's in the water, what they put in the water on that island. Um, but so it's been known that she is transphobic, but the like audacity of her to again at this point in time to really meaningfully come out as a TERF.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's truly impressively tone deaf.
Yeah.
We knew she was tone deaf and she had no connection with the world, and like actual people's lives, like calling Jeremy Corbyn anti-Semitic after making like a goblin banker race with that had hook noses in her books. But
I've,
she
have you read all the
truly
books? Are you deep in the
yeah.
Potter lore? Okay, so
Yeah,
I've only
sadly.
read what was the time travel one? The Prisoner of Azkaban.
Yeah,
Okay, so
I
that's the
think.
only one I've
Yeah.
read, but I've heard from my partner and almost every woman that I've been in a relationship in my entire life that there is an overarching theme. The whole thing is a bit of a metaphor or an allegory to the rise of Nazism. So wasn't there like it was ultimately about races, wasn't it? About how there's different classes between the.
Yeah,
Could you
the like
extrapolate a little bit on
mudbloods.
that?
It's a very liberal understanding, of course, which isn't a surprise. Like
Yeah.
the mudblood thing and how like, mixed the idea being like it's not about like race in the way we understand it, but about like who has magical powers and who doesn't,
Okay.
which seems a little on the nose for like a racial, like if you want to make like someone trying to do a racial allegory but then making it shitty. It's like no, but actually some of the races have magical powers and the other ones don't. Um,
Ah.
but I read them way too early for me to
Hmm.
like have meaningfully extrapolated that. I guess that doesn't surprise me.
Hmm.
But also, there's the end solution to the thing is not that they like reformed the Ministry of Magic or like
Did you say the
um
final solution?
yeah, yeah, basically. I mean, with Rolex, I'm sure she's put that in there.
Hmm.
Like her notes for the thing is like the final solution to the problems in there. But
Hmm.
it's not to like reform the Ministry of Magic. It's just like we have all of the cool friends that went on an adventure that all went on this adventure and like solved the problem are the ones that are going to just be in charge. So
Hmm.
it's just like don't abolish the CIA. We just need Harry Potter running it.
Oh,
Is
okay, I get
basically
it.
the thesis at the end. So
That sounds like the lib manifesto.
yeah, pretty much. It's
Yeah.
I mean yeah, that's basically the whole set of books are the Lib Manifesto. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, no systemic change.
So here was my idea. I was going to read the article, and then at any point, I was hoping you would be like, pause it, like Sam Cedar style, and then
Yeah.
you could debunk her claptrap in real time.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that sound fair and or fun?
Yeah. I haven't read it yet, but I'm sure it's there's a
Neither
lot
have
going
I.
on in there.
Neither have I. But I also wanted to say that I have been working on a couple days on what I can only describe as a pitch perfect impersonation slash accent of JK Rowling. So if you'll permit me, I'd like to read the whole thing in her voice so we can
Absolutely.
truly embody the experience.
Yes, I'm excited. Yes, do
So
that.
if you'll excuse me, I need to get in character. All right.
This isn't today's piece right for reasons that I shortly become clear, but I know it's twice by myself.
Yes.
I've never heard her speak, but I guess that doesn't surprise me.
It's like she's in
that.
the room right now.
Yeah, wow.
All right. I can't keep this facade. All right. This isn't an easy piece to write, for reasons that will shortly become clear, but I know it's time to explain myself on an issue surrounding my toxicity. I write this without any desire to add to that toxicity. For people that don't know, last December I tweeted my support for Maya Forstater, a tax specialist who'd lost her job for what was deemed transphobic tweets. She took the case to an employment tribunal, asking the judge to rule on whether a philosophical belief that sex is determined by biology is protected in law. Judge Taylor ruled that it wasn't. Are you familiar with that case?
I'm honestly not, but I'm assuming it relates to the thing of her saying, J.K. Rowling saying that people are saying that sex isn't real, that there's a connection somehow between, like when someone says that actually gender, like being a woman is related to sex, and let's say, like that tweet of hers from a couple days ago, that it's like an essential quality of womanhood is like that you menstruate. That isn't actually a claim about gender, it's a claim about sex. It's like, I'm sorry for saying that sex actually exists, which I would
Yeah.
imagine is something similar. It's the kind of the obfuscation of the actual critique.
But it seems like the easiest thing to debunk. Like she says, like in her recent post, she was like, "I've done the research, okay? Like I understand what you're trying to say, but like you're denying science by stating these things." And this seems like the easiest thing for someone to point out. Like there's not really any debate about this in the scientific community right now. It's pretty well accepted.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, that like sex isn't actually a binary thing. It's a spectrum. Different people have different like qualities, either I guess more masculine or more feminine, and particularly like intersex people are a good example of how sex in almost a similar way to gender is like not a binary, not the way that even like someone like Rowling would want to contextualize it as, but a lot more complicated than that. Which the fact that she's not even picking up on that is evidence that she hasn't read the literature, any of it.
My interest in trans issues predated Maya's case by almost 2 years, during which I followed the debate around the concept of gender identity closely. I met trans people and read sundry books, blogs, and articles by trans people, gender specialists, intersex people, psychologists, safeguarding experts, social workers, and doctors, and followed the discourse online and in traditional media. On one level, my interest in this issue has been professional, because I'm writing a crime series set in the present day, and my fictional female detective is of an age to be interested in and affected by these issues herself, but on another, it's intensely personal, as I'm about to explain. All the time
I can't wait for her. Sorry, I can't wait for her main character to just be a TERF. That's gonna be awesome. I'm so excited.
Deeply personal to me.
So excited for the chapter for her, like young female detective. That's just all about how the female character thinks that sex is real and how people are claiming sex isn't real.
But that's the mystery, Liv, you see. All the time, I've been researching and learning. Accusations and threats from trans activists have been bubbling in my Twitter timeline. This was initially triggered by when I started taking an interest in gender identity and transgender matters, I began screenshotting comments that interested me, as a way of reminding myself that I might want to research this later. On one occasion, I absentmindedly liked instead of screenshotting. That single I know, right, was deemed evidence of wrongthink. Wrongthink. Ooh, 1984 speak. And a persistent low level of harassment began. Months later, I compounded my accidental like crime by following Magdalene Burns on Twitter. Magdalene was an immensely brave young feminist and lesbian who was dying of an aggressive brain tumor. I followed her because I wanted to contact her directly, which I succeeded in doing. However, as Magdalene was a great believer in the importance of biological sex and didn't believe lesbians should be called... Do you know who she is?
No, I have no clue who that is. But again, it's like firm believer in the existence of biological sex.
Yeah.
It's not like firm believer in the idea that if you have a penis, you can never be a woman, which is what that is. But anyways.
TERF speak. What they call it. And didn't believe lesbians should be called bigots for not dating trans women with penises. Dots were joined in the head of Twitter trans activists, and the level of social media abuse increased. I mention all this to explain that I perfectly well knew what was going to happen when I supported Maya. I must have been on my 4th or 5th cancellation by then. I expected the threats of violence to be told I was literally killing trans people with my hate, to be called cunt, bitch, and of course for my books to be burned, although one particularly abusive man told me he composted them. But I didn't expect... Nice. I know. And you gotta love, like, the persecution complex starting right out of the gates, right? Like,
oh yeah, that's every TERF does this. They're like, actually, I'm being oppressed. It's actually that I think that women are good is why people hate me.
Absolutely.
Not that I, like, treat some women as not being women. You know.
What I didn't expect in the aftermath of my cancellation was an avalanche of emails and letters that came showering upon me, the overwhelming majority of which were positive, grateful, and supportive. They came from a cross-section of kind, empathetic, and intelligent people, some of them working in fields dealing with gender dysphoria, and trans people who were deeply concerned about a way the socio-political concept is influencing politics, medical practice, and safeguarding. They're worried about the dangers to young people, gay people, and about the erosion of women's and girls' rights. Above all, they're worried about a climate of fear that serves nobody, least of all trans youth. Well,
it's such a dumb fucking, like, the idea of, again, not encouraging that, like, not encouraging ideas such as, like, lesbians should be, you know, more comfortable not dating trans women. Again, reaffirming an idea of gender based on biological sex. That, like, getting mad about that, actually you're the one making, you know, trans youth's lives less livable.
Yeah, no shit.
I mean, like, I guess it's a classic TERF technique of, you know, making their actual, like, harmful opinions that genuinely do translate to people's lives being less livable. They're essentially pulling a reverse Uno card. That actually, no, you getting mad at me for this is what is doing it. Maybe if all of these trans activists, and the way that she conceptualized it also, where it's like, yeah, no, I talk to trans people, and a lot of them agree with me. It's just these trans activists online, the vocal minority, whereas the silent majority of trans people are like, yes, no, the definition of womanhood is based upon menstruating, as if that's like... It seems pretty clear, and I think even, like, however much I hate Charlotte Clymer, I think she had some good reply to JK Rowling, where it was like there were these trans groups in Britain that had, like, I think reached out to JK Rowling and said like we will explain these things to you, and she just didn't respond. Like, when she says that she spoke to spoke to trans groups, etc. She didn't actually.
Yeah.
There was no actual dialogue there.
Oh, there's absolutely none. She's like, she hasn't spoken to a single prominent trans organization.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I can't remember the rest of the point there, but just that, like, the TERFs constantly do this. It's the victimhood complex, and generally, I think one of the reasons why it's so common in Britain maybe is because it's upper class white women who have built their entire identity around how oppressed they are as a result of the slight, you know, step down they have against upper class white men. And therefore, anyone that comes against them is actually in that similar position of the upper class white men. And you can see again when it's trans women doing it, and it's like, well, this is men oppressing me.
Is there a British Karen, like Katrina or something to that effect?
Oh, I think maybe it's just Karen in a British accent.
Karen?
Yeah.
I know, again, my spot on. Flawless JK Rowling.
Oh yeah.
I'd stepped back from Twitter for many months before and after tweeting support for Maya because I knew it was doing nothing good for my mental health. I only returned because I wanted to share a free children's book during the pandemic. Immediately, activists who clearly believe themselves to be good, kind, and progressive people swarmed back into my timeline, assuming a right to police my speech, accusing me of hatred, calling me misogynistic slurs, and above all, as every woman involved in this debate will know, TERF.
There it is.
There it is. The dreaded T word. The T slur.
Yeah.
If you didn't already know, and why should you, TERF is an acronym coined by trans activists, which stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. In practice, a huge and diverse cross-section of women are currently being called TERFs, and the vast majority have never been called radical feminists. Examples of so-called TERFs range from a mother of a gay child who's afraid their child wanted to transition to escape homophobic bullying, to a hetero, totally unfeminist older lady who's vowed never to visit Marks and Spencer's again because they're allowing any man who says they identify as a woman into the women's changing rooms. Ironically, radical feminists aren't even trans exclusionary. They include trans men in their feminism because they were born women. But accusations...
Jesus. I mean, holy shit. they're so not transphobic that they call trans men women.
Yeah.
Just think about that. And again, this is like when Nazis are like, oh, you know, I'm actually Hitler was a trade protectionist. I believe in free trade.
It's so true.
Like we're not radical feminists. Like the point that she's being angry about is the R and not the T.
Yeah.
I mean, that shows something in that.
But accusations of turfery have been sufficient to intimidate many people, institutions, and organizations I once admired who were cowering before the tactics of the playground. They'll call us transphobic. They'll say I hate trans people. What next? They'll say, you got fleas? Speaking as a biological woman, a lot of people in positions of power really need to grow a pair, which is doubtless literally possible according to the kind of people who argue that clownfish-proof humans aren't a dimorphic species.
What? Again, speaking as a biological woman, it's like there's no the affirmation is that that's a category of sex, but woman is related to gender. So if and this goes back to the classic TERF talking point that Rowling is saying now as well, that it's like sorry, I believe in sex, that I think sex is real. It's like, well, you think sex and gender are equivalent. Yeah, that's what it is. Thing. That's what biological woman means. Woman is like in no context used as a category of sex. It's a category of gender.
Well, it's gender essentialism, isn't it?
Yeah.
So why am I doing this? Why speak up? Why not quietly do my research and keep my head down? Well, I've got 5 reasons for being worried about the new trans activism and decided I need to speak up. Oh, here we go. Firstly, I have a charitable trust that focuses on alleviating social deprivation in Scotland with a particular emphasis on women and children. Amongst other things, my trust support project for female prisoners and survivors of domestic and sexual abuse. I also fund medical research into MS, a disease that behaves very differently in men and women. It's been clear to me for a while that new trans activism is having, or likely to have, if all its demands are met, a significant impact on many of the causes I support because it's pushing to erode the legal definition of sex and replace it with gender.
I mean, this is the real meaningful explanation of why there are so many TERFs. Is this again, it's the privileged upper middle class or upper class. In Rowling's case, she's a literal billionaire, white woman who is worried about protecting her own social category and position without noticing the ways in which that can harm people who are far more marginalized. I mean, I think there's a lot going on in this paragraph, particularly related to protecting female prisoners, which is, again, that when we talked about that in which she's like, oh, I didn't actually endorse that when the thing talking about before, where instead of screenshotting, she apparently accidentally liked something. That was the comparing trans women to foxes and trans prisons to one prison.
There's a fox in the chicken's hen or den or something to that effect, right?
Yeah, the fox in the hen house.
Yes, that's right.
I believe.
That's right.
Yeah. Which is to say that she did believe that, and the thing she's worried about is that trans women or people. Sorry, what she thinks is people pretending to be women will abuse the system, and actually men will go into women's prisons and rape them or whatever, which is, again, just her worry about trans women being in women's spaces. The only way that that's intelligible as a problem is if trans women aren't women, if it isn't inherently their spaces. But
I bet you she's gonna bring up sports pretty soon. I feel we're on the cusp of it. Yeah, because these are the main talking points, right? It's like, I don't want men to be raping female prisoners in prison, and that's what's happening. And I also don't want men to be beating up women in sports, because that's what's happening as well. Because I don't see them as men or women, right? The second reason is that I'm an ex-teacher and the founder of a children's charity, which gives me an interest in both education and safeguarding. Like many others, I have a deep concern about the effects the trans right movement is having on both. The third is that as a much banned author, I'm interested in freedom of speech and having publicly defended it, even onto Donald Trump. The fourth is where things start to get truly personal. I'm concerned about the huge explosion in young women wishing to transition, and also about the increasing number who seem to be detransitioning, refuting to their original sex, or returning to their original sex.
The amount of people who detransition is so low.
I was like, isn't it like it's a statistical minority? There's no reason to think that this is like a growing problem.
No. And again, all of the people, it's including like Jesse Singal or whatever, all of the people who are pushing that narrative is something that you need to worry about, don't actually give a shit about those few people who are detransitioning. They're using their story as a way to weaponize, trans people who like need and want hormones. And, in the archaic system, particularly in Britain, where you have to like live a year as your identified gender before you get access to hormones to prove that you're not going to regret it, is entirely structured upon this fear of detransitioning. That is just, it's a myth.
Yeah.
It's such a statistical anomaly that it's a myth. And again, if she had read a single paper, she'd know that. But she doesn't, and she doesn't care.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they regret the steps they have, in some cases, altered their bodies irrevocably and taken away their fertility. Some say they decided to transition after realizing they were same-sex attracted, and the transition was partly driven by homophobia, either in society or their families. Wow, she goes deep. I thought she was flirting with TERFism, not like, regurgitating the worst talking points and like tripling down on them.
I couldn't imagine with like the experience of like straight trans women that any of them were like, I didn't experience, after I transitioned and started dating exclusively men as a woman, I experienced no homophobia, which is it's projected homophobia of like you're a man trying to trick me into being gay or whatever. It's probably worse with homophobia combined with transphobia. Imagine you probably, for a fact, you experience far more violence.
Yeah.
Also, the way that TERFs describe how hormones work, I wish the way that they described it is how it actually did. It takes so long for those things to come into effect.
How long before you start noticing anything?
Like half a year before there are like so
it's not like it's not just a magic injection or a pill, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm a woman now.
Yeah, no, I wish.
Yeah.
It's like half a year before you start to notice minor symptoms that are reversible. So like minor breast growth, potentially lack of fertility. Although some trans women continue to have fertility for a while, for instance. Yeah, it takes a very long time. There are certainly people who go on hormones and then are like, well, I don't want this, and they go off them. And unless you've been doing that for like a year or more, most of, if not all of the effects are reversed. So it's very low risk to start them.
Most people aren't aware, I certainly wasn't until I started researching this issue properly, that 10 years ago, the majority of people wanting to transition to the opposite sex were male. The ratio has now reversed. The UK has experienced a 4,400% increase in girls referring to transitioning treatment. Autistic girls are hugely overrepresented in their numbers. And
again, you see how like this is a very subtle way of just misgendering trans men?
Yeah. Well, that on top of the fact that she's now armchair diagnosing them as having mental illness, basically.
Yeah. Which is like a classic. I mean, they did this with gay people in the 60s, which is to say that they were like mentally ill. And it's like, one of the reasons is like because of society, the trauma and like lack of comfortability, like as related to your own identity and how you're recognized, do create like mental illnesses. And you can see like mental illnesses in, let's say, gay men as society gets more kind of, I guess, less homophobic. You can see that I can't remember what they called the specific syndrome they would like diagnose gay men as, but it like went away.
Mm-hmm.
Also, when the DSM was okay, let's not have syndrome. Let's not, maybe that's not a good idea. It went away. So, I mean, there's a shit ton of discourse related to like the medicalization of trans people and queer people in general. And how homophobia became an intelligible concept after it was intelligible to medicalize them or medicalize like gay men. But of course, yeah, again, like all of this discourse around the fact that actually all the trans activism is convincing young girls that they're men and that it's a lie. You don't care about those trans men. You don't talk to them. You haven't talked to them. You aren't listening to what they have to say. You're using them as a bludgeon to harm as many trans people as possible.
Well, I mean, I gotta be totally honest. It sounds like she hasn't listened to anyone except for TERFs and TERF literature. Like, that's where all these talking points are coming from, right?
Yeah, totally.
The same phenomenon has been seen in the US. In 2018, the American physician and researcher Lisa Littman set out to explore it. In an interview, she said, parents online were describing a very unusual pattern of transgender identification where multiple friends and even entire friend groups became transgender identified at the same time. I would have been remiss had I not considered social contagion, holy fuck, and peer influences as potential factors.
And again, like, she's saying she's listening to everyone. She's only citing transphobes.
Yep.
And of course, I mean, that phenomenon of like, seeing a trans person in your social circle and being like, oh, you can do that?
Yeah.
Oh, I want to do that is the thing that happens. That's how like one of the major ways that I came to my identity was like being around trans people.
Which is such a ridiculous concept.
Yeah. It's like, oh,
isn't that where that whole, like, I don't want to use this term because I know it's one of the bigots, but like where they combine like trending, where they talk about
transgender.
Yeah, but like, I hear
one.
that's like not a word you should be saying. It's like
no, yeah, it's probably
But anyways, isn't that whole idea that like everyone's just doing it because it's a fad?
Yeah, which like is like. I think the people who think that that's possible, which is some, like the more transphobic trans people, like Blair White uses that term, for instance, for like trans people. For trans people, she doesn't like basically. Like the understanding of gender that people have in gender identity, that like that there could be some phenomenon of people literally changing their gender identity for clout. It's like, you don't understand how shitty it is to live as a gender you don't identify as.
That's so ridiculous.
The clout gain is like, no, it's not.
That like when I tried to explain to people later in life about bisexuality or pansexuality and that kind of stuff, or even homosexuality, I was like, do you think, to anyone who thinks they're choosing, like this is a choice, so they've chosen to be this way, would anyone choose to have a much harder life where they get beat up all the time in high school and they have high rates of suicide, they have a lot more trouble getting jobs, they're vilified by their friends, their family, they're ostracized? Do you think anyone looks at that and it's like, that looks like the better option for me, right? Like, I don't know how else to put it.
It seems contrarian if I do this. Wow, I'm really really edgy. It's like, no, that's exactly. Not. That doesn't drive people's. It's a very like. Maybe something related to projection and like their political opinions. Maybe you could maybe that's a reach. I mean, it probably is. It's like a psychoanalytic thing of like these people's understandings of like performatively being a thing, particularly related to like their political opinions. They accidentally universalize that to everyone to the extent that they think that people are for like clout and recognition changing their genders.
It's so ridiculous.
I don't know.
Parents online were describing a very unusual pattern of transgender identification where multiple friends and even entire friend groups became transgender identified at the same time. Oh, sorry, we had already read this. Her paper caused a furore. She was accused of bias and spreading misinformation about transgender people, subjected to a tsunami of abuse and concerted campaign to discredit both her and her work. The journal took a paper offline and re-reviewed it before republishing it. However, her career took a similar hit to that suffered by Maya Forstater. Lisa Littman had dared to challenge one of the most central tenets of trans activism, which is that a person's gender identity is innate, like sexual orientation. Nobody, the activists insisted, could ever be persuaded into being trans. The argument of many current trans activists is that if you don't let a gender dysphoric teenage transition, they will kill themselves. In an article explaining what... Sorry, go ahead.
I say no, just that sounds pretty accurate compared to like what trans people are saying, and you know, that's the Anyways.
In an article explaining why he resigned from Tavistock, an NHS gender clinic in England, psychiatrist Marcus Evans stated that he claims that children will kill themselves if not permitted to transition, do not align substantially with any robust data or studies in this area, nor do they align with the cases I've encountered over decades as a psychotherapist. Ooh, feels over the reels. The writings of young trans men reveal a group of notably sensitive and clever people. The more of their accounts of gender dysphoria I've read, with their insightful descriptions of anxiety, dissociation, eating disorders, self-harm, and self-hatred, the more I've wondered whether, if I had been born 30 years later, I too might have tried to transition.
Jeez. I mean...
I just narrowly escaped.
I mean, it back to the medicalization thing, right? Where it's like... I mean, this is what, you know, people were saying about gay people in the 60s, which is like the reason they're gay is because they're mentally ill. There's some pathologic problem with them. They need to be put in a mental hospital and treated. You know, oh, you can't allow their lifestyle to continue. They need to be put in a mental hospital and treated. But so that we can deal with the direct symptoms. It's like the direct symptoms are that they're like living in a gender identity that isn't them. That is far from their authentic selves, and that is very harmful to your psyche, to your, and you will like develop, let's say, you have a larger chance of developing mental illness, particularly when you try to, and then you transition and you experience transphobia, and then that continues. I mean, it's totally. That doesn't even
put into account whether or not your family like disowns you, your friends.
Oh,
like,
absolutely,
stop talking to you,
yes.
all those other horrible things.
Yeah, social ostracization.
Yeah,
I'm getting that word wrong. And again, you can see how like the way that she's phrasing it makes it worse. That they're like, no, you need to be put in a mental hospital. Yeah, you're making a choice. It's just it's all the people, you know, let's say the young trans men, parents have disowned them. It's the same thing that they have been saying to them, which caused this in the first place. It's why we're here in the first place, right?
Wait, this gets so much worse. Listen to this next line, okay? So I too might have tried to transition. The allure of escaping womanhood would have been huge.
Oh my god.
I struggled with severe OCD as a teenager. If I'd known community and sympathy online that I couldn't find in my immediate environment, I believe I could have been persuaded to turn myself into the son my father had openly said he'd have preferred. Holy shit. Wow, this is more radical than I think any other TERF I've heard. Like in terms of TERF literature, like she's taking it to the next level.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't realize the extent to which she was a TERF, which is probably like why she's been quiet this whole time. Why it's been like, you know, little peaks, little minor indications of beliefs. Because when she formalizes it, it's literally the most transphobic shit I've ever heard. Which again, I think at this point, like most TERFs, even Grant Linham said that he wasn't transphobic and that he loves trans people.
Did you see his latest tweet that I just retweeted though?
No.
If he did, that's completely performative. What did he just tweet out?
Of course.
Many of the most vocal activists right now on social media are trans or gender fluid people in their 20s who appear to have serious emotional problems. I genuinely feel bad for them.
Oh, that was Tracy, not.
Sorry. Yeah.
I mean, Freudian slip. They're very similar at this point.
There's a lot of crossover between the two.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get back to the allure of trans male privilege and how she narrowly avoided it. When I read about the theory of gender identity, I remember how mentally sexless I felt in youth. I remember Colette's description of herself as a mental hermaphrodite, and Simone de Beauvoir's words, "It is perfectly natural for the future woman to feel indignant at the limitations imposed upon her by sex."
Oh,
The real question...
keep her name out of your fucking mouth, Rowling.
Yeah, no shit.
Who's quoting Simone de Beauvoir, who is like, even in the 40s, her theories, like an understanding of she made the sex gender distinction. She conceptualized it. She was the first like gender theorist that conceptualized the exact opposite thing you're saying.
It's kind of like how right-wingers love quoting MLK without ever acknowledging that he was a socialist, but it's always just
or
like,
they love quoting
that's if he's like a
1984,
libertarian. Yes, that's
which has literally been quoted in this too.
Yeah,
I guess it comes full circle.
The real question is not why she should reject them. The problem is rather to understand why she accepts them. As I didn't have a realistic possibility of becoming a man in the 1980s, it had to be books and music that got me through both my mental health issues and the sexualized scrutiny and judgments that set so many girls to war with their bodies in their teens. Fortunately for me, I found my own sense of otherness, and my ambivalence about being a woman reflected in the work of female writers and musicians who reassured me that in spite of everything a sexist world tries to throw in the female-bodied, it's fine not to feel pink, frilly, and compliant inside your own head. It's okay to feel confused, dark, both sexual and non-sexual, unsure of what or who you are. I want to be very clear here. I know transition will be a solution for some gender dysphoric